Alessandro Russo hadn't slept in 4 nights. Not really. He closed his eyes sometimes. He sat in the dark. He let the hours pass. But sleep never came. Every time he got close, something pulled him back. A sound, a memory, a face, always a face. Tonight it was worse. The city outside his penthouse windows pulsed with life. Headlights streaked like ribbons of white and red across the dark asphalt below. Sirens wailed in the distance. People were moving down there, living their lives, acting like nothing in the world could touch them. But inside, high above the streets, it felt like he was suffocating. Alessandro loosened his collar, pulling at the expensive fabric of his dark shirt. It didn't help. He poured a glass of amber scotch, the heavy crystal cold against his palm. He didn't taste it when he drank. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass, looking down at his kingdom. The Russo family empire was his now. He had fought for it. He had bled for it. He had betrayed and been betrayed to sit at the very top of this mountain of concrete and gold. But standing here, looking out at the glittering expanse of the city, he realized the top was just a high-altitude cage. He stopped halfway across the room. He forgot why he had even gotten up. Then, a flash. Not in the room. In his head. A ghost from his past. A memory he had buried deep beneath layers of ice, work, and calculated indifference. The man's eyes, wide, shaking, terrified. Please. That was all he had managed to get out. The memory snapped into place all at once. The warehouse near the docks. The smell of damp concrete, rotting wood, and the heavy metallic tang of copper in the air. The weight of the gun in Alessandro's hand. Heavy, cold, and final. He had been younger then, not yet the boss, but a loyal soldier executing orders. He had hesitated that night, just a fraction of a second. It was a mistake, a dangerous crack in his armor, but it had been enough to notice something he wasn't supposed to see. The man had a photo in his shirt pocket. It was folded, worn at the edges from years of touch. A photo of a little girl. She was smiling, with big, bright eyes and wild, dark hair. The shot came anyway. It always did. Alessandro had pulled the trigger because that was what survival meant in his world. You killed the human inside you so the monster could live. But tonight, 15 years later, the ghost of that night was back. Alessandro inhaled sharply. It was too fast. There wasn't enough air in the room. His chest tightened, a band of steel wrapping around his ribs. His vision blurred at the edges, the twinkling lights of the city turning into jagged, painful streaks of white. This wasn't fear. He didn't do fear. He had faced down loaded barrels without his heart rate skipping a beat. He had carved his name into the city's history with steady hands and a cold heart. But something was wrong. Something was breaking inside him. He reached for the marble counter, his fingers searching for purchase to steady his shaking frame. His hand brushed the heavy crystal glass. It slipped. The sound of it shattering against the dark marble floor was deafening. It echoed off the bare, minimalist walls of his living room. Too loud, way too loud. Then, the silence rushed back in. Heavy, pressing, suffocating. Alessandro stood there, chest heaving, staring at the glittering shards of glass on the floor. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped animal. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. He felt entirely, utterly helpless. His phone was sitting a few inches away on the counter, a sleek black rectangle, dark screen, waiting. He didn't remember picking it up. He didn't remember unlocking it. But suddenly, his fingers were scrolling through his private contacts, finding a number he had saved on a whim. A few days ago, one of his associates, a man who worked the seedier, late-night operations, had joked about a private line, a discreet companion service. For the men who have too much money and too much quiet, the man had said, laughing. Alessandro had nearly backhanded him for the implication. But now, in the suffocating quiet of his penthouse, the memory of that number surfaced. He stared at the screen, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. His breathing was still shallow. uneven. This was ridiculous. It was pathetic. It was a weakness he couldn't afford. If his enemies knew the great Alessandro Russo was dialing a phone line in the middle of the night like a desperate, lonely soul, they would circle like vultures. He should put it down. Walk away. Be the monster they all feared. Instead, his thumb moved. He pressed call. He held the phone to his ear, his heart rate spiking. The line rang once. A sharp, mechanical sound. Twice. 3 times. He was about to hang up, disgusted with his own vulnerability, when the line clicked. A voice answered. It wasn't the breathy, artificial voice he had expected. It wasn't a practiced, seductive purr. It was soft, calm, steady. "Hey," she said gently. Her voice had a slight, natural rasp to it, warm and deeply human. "You can take your time." Alessandro froze. The phone pressed against his ear felt hot. He couldn't speak. The words were stuck in his throat, choked out by the lingering panic in his chest. "I'm here," she whispered, her tone carrying an easy, patient warmth. "Just breathe. You don't have to say anything until you're ready." Alessandro closed his eyes. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass of the window, letting the cool surface soothe his burning skin. And for the first time in 4 nights, the noise in his head paused. "Are you still there?" she asked, after a long moment of silence. He swallowed, his throat dry. "Yes." His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, rough from disuse and exhaustion. "Good," she said. He could hear a faint shift in her movement on the other end, the soft rustle of fabric. For a second, I thought I was talking to a very quiet ghost. The slight edge of dry humor in her voice caught him off guard. It wasn't deferential. It wasn't terrified. She had no idea who he was. "I'm not a ghost," he said. "Could have fooled me," she replied, her tone light but incredibly grounding. "But ghosts don't usually breathe that heavily. You sound like you've been running." "I've been standing still." "Sometimes that's harder," she murmured. There was no judgment in her voice, just an innate, quiet understanding. "What's your name?" Alessandro's guard went up instantly, the instinct of a man who lived in the shadows. "I don't give names." "Fair enough," she said, entirely unbothered. "We don't need names. Names carry too much weight anyway. Let's just go with Mystery Man. Or, if you prefer, Quiet Guy." "I'm leaning toward Quiet Guy." He felt a microscopic tug at the corner of his mouth. It was a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. "And you?" he asked. "My shift supervisor calls me Operator 402, she said, her voice dripping with dry amusement. "But you can call me whatever you like. Tonight, I'm just the voice on the other end of the line." "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "At this hour?" "Well, the pay is terrible, but the company is occasionally interesting," she joked softly. Then, her tone softened, becoming infinitely warmer. "Actually, I do it because the world is too loud at 3 in the morning, and sometimes people just need someone to help hold the quiet." Alessandro let out a slow, long breath. The tight band around his chest loosened, just a fraction. "Tell me a story," he murmured. "A story?" she asked. He could hear the smile in her voice. What kind of story does a nameless, quiet man want to hear at 3 a.m.? "Anything," he said, closing his eyes, letting her voice wash over him. "Just speak." And so, she did. She talked about the rain she could see outside her window, about a stray cat she had seen stealing a slice of pizza earlier that day, about a ridiculous book she was trying to read during her breaks. Her words were simple, mundane, and utterly divorced from his world of blood, betrayal, and power. And as she spoke, Alessandro Russo felt his shoulders drop. The darkness in his penthouse didn't feel so heavy anymore. The rain had stopped outside Mia's window, but she kept talking about it anyway, painting a picture of wet asphalt and neon reflections for the silent man on the other end of the line. She had learned early in this job that silence made people uncomfortable, but the right kind of voice could make silence feel like a blanket instead of a void. "You know," she said, tucking her legs underneath her on the worn cushion of her second-hand armchair. Most guys who call this line either want to talk about their ex-wives or they want me to guess what they're wearing. You are neither. It's honestly a nice change of pace. Should I be offended? Alessandro asked. His voice had smoothed out slightly, the rough edges of panic softening into something quieter. No, she said, a smile clearly audible in her tone. You should be relieved. I only have 3 good ex-wife voices, and I used them all up on a guy named Gary earlier tonight. A low sound rumbled in Alessandro's chest. It took him a second to realize what it was. A laugh. Small, rusty, barely audible but real. Mia noticed it immediately. She always noticed things like that. It was in her nature to catch the small shifts in a person's breathing, the tiny cracks where the truth slipped through. Was that a laugh? She asked, feigning shock. Quiet guy has a sense of humor. I did not see that in my notes. You don't have notes on me, he said. I have imaginary notes, she corrected. In my imaginary notes, it says, tall, brooding, sounds like he hasn't smiled since 2019. I might have to update that. He didn't answer right away, but she could hear him breathing, steadier now than when the call had first connected. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It had texture. It had ease. Why do you assume I'm tall? He finally asked. Voices like yours are always tall, she said matter-of-factly. Deep, slow, a little bit dangerous. It's basic biology. Short men talk faster. I don't make the rules. That's not a real rule. It absolutely is. I invented it just now, which makes it official. Another low laugh escaped him, longer this time, and it startled him more than the first one had. He pressed 2 fingers against his temple, as if checking to see if he was still the same man who had walked into this apartment 3 hours ago, hollowed out and shaking. He wasn't sure anymore. You're very good at this, he admitted quietly. At making broken men laugh at 3 in the morning? Yes, it's my one marketable skill, she said. Then her tone shifted, dropping the playful edge, becoming something warmer and more careful. But for what it's worth, you didn't sound broken. You sounded tired. There's a difference. Alessandro closed his eyes. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years. Not his men, who feared him. Not his enemies, who wanted to be him. Not even the family he had left, who mostly avoided his eyes at the dinner table because looking at him too long felt dangerous. Tired, he repeated slowly, testing the word. It happens to the best of us, she said. Even mystery men in penthouses, probably. He froze slightly. I never said I was in a penthouse. You didn't have to, she said lightly. You've got that echo, the kind you only get in a big, empty room with too much furniture and not enough people in it. Also, you sound like a man who owns at least one very expensive, completely impractical piece of art. He almost smiled again. She wasn't wrong. There was a 6-foot sculpture in his foyer that he hated, purchased purely to intimidate visiting associates. You're observant, he said. It's a curse, Mia replied. I notice everything. My mother says I could find the one crooked picture frame in a burning building. That sounds exhausting. You have no idea, she said. But there was fondness in it, not complaint. For the next several minutes, she let the conversation drift into smaller things. She told him about the diner down the street from her apartment that served pie at all hours, about the neighbor's dog that howled every time an ambulance passed, about how she had once tried to bake bread during a particularly reckless phase of unemployment and nearly burned down her kitchen. None of it mattered. None of it was supposed to matter. But Alessandro found himself hanging on every word, memorizing the rhythm of her sentences, the way her voice dipped when she was amused and rose when she was building toward a joke. He hadn't listened to anyone like this in years. He hadn't wanted to. Somewhere in the middle of a story about her disastrous attempt at making pasta from scratch, he realized his chest didn't hurt anymore. The tight, suffocating pressure that had gripped him for 4 nights straight had eased into something almost bearable. You're very quiet again, Mia said gently, noticing the shift. I'm listening, he said. That's dangerous. I could talk for hours if given permission. Then talk, he said. It came out lower than he intended, rougher, almost like a request he didn't know how to phrase properly. Mia paused for half a second, something in his tone catching her attention, but she didn't push. She simply continued, her voice weaving easily through the dark, filling every corner of his cold apartment with something that felt dangerously close to warmth. Alessandro sat down slowly on the edge of his leather chair, the phone pressed against his ear like a lifeline. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her face. He didn't know anything real about her at all. But for the first time and longer than he could remember, he didn't feel alone. And that terrified him more than any gun ever had. 3 weeks passed, and the calls became a ritual neither of them spoke about out loud. Every night, somewhere between 11 and midnight, Alessandro's phone would light up the dark of his study, and he would dial the same number without hesitation. He no longer felt the shame he had the first night. Shame had been replaced by something quieter, something that lived in his chest, like a low, steady hum he had come to depend on. "You're early tonight," Mia said when she picked up, her voice carrying the particular warmth she reserved only for him now, though she would never have admitted that even to herself. "Bad night," Alessandro said simply. He was standing in his study, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his forearms. There was a fresh bruise forming along his knuckles, hidden beneath the dim lighting, a souvenir from a conversation with a supplier who had made the mistake of lying to him. He didn't mention that part. He never did. "Define bad," Mia said. He could hear the sound of her moving, settling into whatever chair or couch had become her nightly perch. "Bad like you stubbed your toe, or bad like you need to talk about it." "The second one." "All right," she said. "No judgment, no probing, just steady acceptance. Talk." He hesitated. He always hesitated at this part, the part where he had to decide how much truth he could give her without giving her too much. He had learned, over these 3 weeks, how to speak around the edges of his life. He talked about power without naming what kind. He talked about enemies without naming who they were. He talked about guilt without naming the faces attached to it. "I did something today," he said slowly, "that I've done 100 times before, and it never used to bother me. But it's bothering you now," Mia said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Why do you think that is?" Alessandro sat down heavily in his chair, dragging a hand down his face. "I don't know. Maybe I'm getting soft. Or maybe you're finally waking up," Mia offered gently. "There's a difference between going soft and growing a conscience. One makes you weak, the other makes you human. I don't have room for a conscience in my line of work." "What line of work is that, exactly?" she asked, the question light, teasing, but with a thread of genuine curiosity underneath it. She asked variations of this every few nights, always careful, always easy to brush off, like she was testing a door to see if it was locked, rather than trying to break it down. "Complicated," Alessandro said, the same answer he always gave. "Everything about you is complicated," Mia said with a small laugh. "You're like a locked box wrapped in another locked box. I hope there's something good in the middle, because I've been very patient." "You have," he admitted. "I'm an incredibly patient woman," she said. "Ask my landlord. He's been promising to fix my heater since October, and I still send him a Christmas card." Alessandro's mouth curved slightly. It was becoming easier now, that small movement, the muscle memory of amusement returning to a face that had forgotten how to make it. "Your heater's broken?" "Broken is a strong word. Let's say it has strong opinions about when it wants to work. That sounds cold." "It is," she said simply, and something in her voice shifted just slightly, a small crack of exhaustion slipping through the humor before she smoothed it back over. "But it builds character. Or frostbite. One of the two." Alessandro frowned faintly in the darkness of his study. He had learned to listen for these small dips in her tone, the moments where her jokes worked a little too hard to cover something underneath. "You should get it fixed," he said. "I should get a lot of things fixed," Mia replied lightly, "but priorities. Rent first, then possibly food. The heater is somewhere near the bottom of a very long list." That doesn't sound like a good list. It's not, she said, and there was a beat where he thought she might close the door on the subject entirely. But then she sighed, and the honesty came, quiet and unguarded. I'm saving for something. Has been for a while. It eats into everything else. Saving for what? There was a long pause. Alessandro almost thought she wouldn't answer. Answers, she finally said. My father died when I was 11. Nobody ever told us the truth about what happened. The police report was thin. The details never added up. I've spent years trying to find someone who actually knows what happened to him. But people like that don't come cheap. And people like that don't like talking to broke 26-year-olds with more questions than money. Something cold moved through Alessandro's chest, quick and sharp, though he couldn't place why. He had heard hundreds of stories like this over the years. Death was common in his world. Grief was common in every world. There was no reason this particular sentence should have landed the way it did. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it more than he expected to. It was a long time ago, Mia said, her voice steady again, though softer now. I don't talk about it much. Feels heavy for a phone call at midnight. You listen to my heaviness all the time, Alessandro said. Seems only fair. Look at you, she said, a small laugh returning to her voice, though gentler now, more careful, being considerate. I might have to update my imaginary notes again. What do they say now? Tall, brooding, secretly kind, underneath several layers of emotional constipation. Alessandro let out a real laugh this time, low and surprised, the sound filling the empty study around him. Emotional constipation. It's a clinical term, Mia said solemnly. I read about it somewhere. Very serious condition. I'll consider treatment. Start small, she said. Maybe tell me one true thing about yourself. Nothing dangerous, just something real. Alessandro considered this for a long moment, staring at the dim skyline outside his window. There was so much he could never tell her. So much that would end this, the second the words left his mouth. But there was room, still, for small truths, the kind that wouldn't break anything. I don't sleep, he said. Haven't, not properly, in years, until you started answering the phone. The line went quiet for a moment. When Mia spoke again, her voice had lost its usual playful edge, replaced by something softer, more careful, like she was holding something fragile. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in months, she said. And I once had a guy tell me I had very calming elbows. Calming elbows? Alessandro repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. I don't make the compliments. I just collect them, she said. But truly, thank you. That means something. Especially from someone who apparently has more layers than a very complicated cake. Is that a compliment? It's the highest compliment I give, Mia said. Cake is very important to me. They talked for another hour after that, drifting between easy jokes and quiet honesty, the conversation moving like water finding its level. By the time Alessandro finally hung up, the sky outside had begun its slow shift toward gray, the first hint of dawn creeping over the skyline. He sat in the silence of his study, phone still warm in his hand, and realized with a strange, unsettling clarity that he had started organizing his entire life around a woman whose name he didn't know, whose face he had never seen, and whose father's unsolved death had just settled into his chest like a stone he couldn't explain. He told himself it was nothing, a coincidence. The world was full of dead fathers and grieving daughters. But some quiet, buried part of him, the part that still remembered a folded photograph in a dying man's pocket, refused to believe it. The nightmares had gotten worse. Alessandro hadn't told Mia this directly, not in those words, but she had started to hear it in the spaces between his sentences, in the way his voice sometimes caught before he steadied it, in the long pauses that used to feel comfortable and now felt like something straining underneath. Tonight the pause lasted almost a full minute before he spoke. I keep seeing a photograph, he said finally, his voice low, stripped of its usual control. A little girl, smiling. I don't know why it won't leave me alone. Mia sat up slightly on her couch, the blanket sliding off her shoulder. Something in his tone had shifted, dropped lower than she had ever heard it, raw in a way that made her chest tighten in response. "Whose little girl?" she asked gently. "I don't know," he said, and it was almost true. He knew whose daughter she had been. He didn't know, couldn't let himself know, what that girl had grown into. Someone from a long time ago. Someone I hurt. Hurt how? Alessandro closed his eyes. He was standing at the window again, the city glittering below him like a field of dying stars. He had never come this close to the truth with her before. Every instinct in him screamed to pull back, to redirect, to give her a smaller, safer piece of himself the way he always did. But something in him was tired of hiding, tired in a way that ached down to the bone. "I've done things," he said slowly, "that most people would call unforgivable. I used to believe that didn't matter, as long as it kept the people under me safe, as long as it kept order. And now? Now I don't know what I believe," he admitted. "Now there's a photograph in my head, and I can't make it stop." Mia was quiet for a long moment. She didn't offer a joke this time, didn't reach for the light, easy warmth that usually softened these calls. Instead, her voice came through steady and low, carrying a different kind of comfort, the kind that didn't try to fix anything. "You don't have to tell me what you did," she said. "I'm not asking you to confess, but whatever it is, the fact that it still haunts you says something. Monsters don't lose sleep over old photographs. People do." Alessandro's throat tightened. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, the city lights blurring slightly at the edges of his vision. "I don't deserve that kind of forgiveness," he said quietly. "I didn't say you were forgiven," Mia replied gently. "I said you were human. Those are two very different things. Forgiveness is earned. Being human is just where you start." He let out a slow breath, something in his chest loosening, just slightly, at the honesty in her words. She wasn't trying to absolve him. She wasn't trying to make him feel better with empty comfort. She was simply sitting with him in the dark, unafraid of what he might be. "How are you so good at this?" he asked. "Years of practice talking men off metaphorical ledges at midnight," she said, though her voice had softened, losing its usual playful edge. "And maybe because I know what it's like to carry something you can't put down." "Your father," he said. "My father," she confirmed quietly. "Some nights I still expect him to walk through the door. It's been 15 years and some part of me still hasn't caught up to the fact that he's gone." Alessandro's stomach turned to stone. 15 years. The number landed like a blow, precise and unbearable, though she had no idea what it had just done to him. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time the words nearly broke on their way out of his mouth. "I know," Mia said softly. "You keep saying that. It's strange, actually. Most people change the subject the second I mention him. You just sit with it." "I don't know how to do anything else right now," Alessandro admitted. They sat in silence together for a while, the kind of silence that had weight and meaning, the kind neither of them felt the urge to fill. Alessandro listened to her breathing on the other end of the line, steady and warm, and felt something inside him settle in a way it hadn't in years, maybe ever. It was that stillness, that dangerous, unfamiliar peace, that pushed the words out of him before he could stop them. "I want to see you," he said. Mia went quiet. "I don't mean that carelessly," he continued, his voice rougher now, edged with something like fear, though he would never have called it that. "I know the rules. I know what this is supposed to be. But I've spent 3 weeks talking to you every night, and I don't even know what you look like. I don't know your laugh in person. I don't know if your eyes match your voice." "Alessandro," Mia started, then stopped herself, the sound of his name unfamiliar and strange on her tongue. Since he had never given it to her before, he froze. "You know my name," he said quietly. "I looked you up the second night we talked," she admitted, a small, sheepish laugh slipping out despite the tension. "Curiosity is a professional hazard. I didn't find much, just enough to know you're careful about what you let people see. And you kept talking to me anyway. You never gave me a reason not to," she said simply. "Whoever you are during the day, The man on this phone has never been anything but honest with me. Mostly honest, she corrected. Selectively honest, but honest where it counts. Alessandro felt something crack open in his chest, equal parts relief and dread. She knew his name. She had known it for weeks and had never used it as leverage, never treated him differently because of it. "So," he said carefully, "will you meet me?" The silence stretched long enough that he thought she might refuse. He wouldn't have blamed her. Everything about this was reckless, dangerous, a violation of every rule that kept people like her safe from people like him. "Okay," Mia finally said, her voice quieter than usual, threaded with something uncertain but real. "Yes, let's meet." Relief flooded through him, sharp and unfamiliar, followed almost immediately by a cold, creeping dread he couldn't quite name. "There's a rooftop bar downtown," he said. "The Halcyon. Quiet, private. Would that work?" "I know it," Mia said. "Fancy. I'll have to borrow a nicer sweater." "You don't need to impress me," Alessandro said softly. "Force of habit," she replied, a faint tremor of nerves slipping through her usual ease. "All right. Tomorrow night?" "Tomorrow night," he confirmed. After they hung up, Alessandro remained standing at the window for a long time, staring out at the city that had never once felt like home. Somewhere out there, a woman he had never seen was lying awake too, staring at her own ceiling, wondering what kind of man she was about to meet. He thought of the photograph again, the little girl, the smile. 15 years, she had said. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since this had started, the voice in his head wasn't hers. It was his own, cold and certain, whispering a truth he could no longer ignore. Tomorrow, everything was going to break. The Halcyon sat 30 stories above the city, its rooftop garden glowing under strings of warm amber lights, the kind of place designed to make people feel like the world below didn't exist. Alessandro arrived 20 minutes early, which was, in itself, an anomaly. He was never early. Early meant vulnerability. Early meant waiting. Tonight, he waited anyway. He chose a table near the edge, half hidden by a trellis of climbing ivy, close enough to the railing that he could feel the wind, far enough from the entrance that he could watch everyone who walked in before they saw him. Old habits. Survival habits. They didn't disappear just because his hands wouldn't stop shifting against the tablecloth. He had changed his shirt twice before leaving the penthouse. He had told himself it didn't matter, that this was reckless and foolish and beneath him, and then he had stood in front of his closet for 10 minutes anyway, trying to decide what a man wore to meet a voice he had fallen in love with in the dark. He hated the word the second it crossed his mind. Love. He wasn't supposed to be capable of it anymore. He had traded that part of himself away years ago, piece by piece, for power and silence and the illusion of control. And yet here he was, checking his watch every 90 seconds like a nervous teenager. The host approached the top of the stairwell. Alessandro's whole body went still. A woman stepped into view. She was exactly as he'd imagined, and nothing like he'd imagined, both at once. Dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, slightly wind-tossed from the elevator ride up. She wore a soft green sweater, simple, unpretentious, the kind of thing that didn't try to compete with the expensive dresses draped over the other women in the room. She looked around the rooftop with open curiosity, not intimidated by the wealth surrounding her, just quietly amused by it, the way someone might smile at an elaborate joke only they understood. She was lovely, warm, real, in a way that made the entire rooftop look artificial by comparison. And then she turned her head, and the amber lighting caught her face fully for the first time. The world stopped. Alessandro's glass slipped an inch in his grip before he caught it, his knuckles white against the crystal. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning out the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, drowning out the murmur of conversation around him, drowning out everything except the sudden, violent recognition tearing through his chest. He knew that face, not from memory of her. He had never seen her before in his life. He knew that face from a photograph, folded, worn at the edges, tucked inside the pocket of a man who had begged him to stop, just before the shot rang out 15 years ago in a warehouse that still visited him in his sleep. The same eyes, the same nose, the same faint dimple that appeared when she smiled, which she was doing now, at something the host had said. Marco Caruso's daughter. The little girl in the photograph had grown into the woman walking toward him, unaware that she was about to sit across from the man who had ended her father's life. Alessandro's chest constricted violently. He felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, silent collapse, though nothing on his face moved. Decades of discipline held his expression locked in careful neutrality, even as something inside him shattered completely, all at once, like glass dropped from a great height. She spotted him. Her face lit up with recognition, though not the kind that would destroy them both. Not yet. She recognized him only as the man on the phone, the mystery voice she had spent 3 weeks getting to know in the dark. "You're taller than I imagined," Mia said as she approached the table, her voice carrying the same warm, teasing lilt he had grown addicted to over the last 3 weeks. "Also, considerably more intimidating in person. I feel like I should apologize for some of my jokes now." Alessandro rose to his feet, out of pure instinct, an old courtesy drilled into him from childhood, though his legs felt unsteady beneath him for the first time in years. "Mia," he said, and her name in his voice, spoken for the first time out loud, sounded like something breaking. "You remembered," she said, smiling as she slid into the seat across from him. "I'm flattered. Most men forget my name by the second round of drinks." He couldn't answer. His throat had closed entirely around the words, trying to claw their way out. Every instinct screamed at him to stand up, to walk away, to disappear into the city before she learned the truth, and the fragile, impossible thing they had built together turned to ash between them. But he couldn't move. He could only stare at her, at the face that had haunted a dead man's pocket for years, before it ever haunted him. "You're staring," Mia said, amusement flickering across her features, though a hint of uncertainty crept into her voice now, sensing something off in the air between them. "Is there spinach in my teeth? I had a salad on the way here. Very poor decision." "No," Alessandro managed, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. You look exactly like I imagined." It was true, and it was also the smallest, most insignificant fragment of the truth, crashing down around him. Mia tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same careful perception she had shown him over dozens of late-night calls, the same intuition that had comforted him through 4 sleepless nights and everything after. "You seem different than you did on the phone," she said slowly. "Is everything okay?" Alessandro forced his features into something resembling composure, though his hands remained tightly clenched beneath the table, hidden from view. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to end this now, to protect her from what he was, from what he had done, from the truth that would destroy whatever fragile piece she had built her life around. "I'm fine," he lied, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. But inside, everything had already collapsed. The woman who had pulled him back from the edge of himself, who had taught him what it felt like to be human again after years of numbness, who had somehow become the only light in his suffocating darkness. She was the daughter of a man he had murdered with his own hands. And she had no idea she was sitting across from her father's killer. The waiter came and went, leaving a bottle of wine neither of them touched. Alessandro sat rigid across from Mia, his hands folded so tightly together beneath the table that his knuckles ached. He was aware of every second passing, each one stretching unbearably long, as if the universe itself understood the weight of what was happening and refused to move any faster. Mia was talking, something about the ridiculous height of the rooftop and how she'd nearly gotten vertigo in the glass elevator, but Alessandro heard almost none of it. His mind had gone somewhere else entirely, back to a warehouse 15 years ago, back to a man on his knees with a photograph in his pocket, back to the exact moment he had chosen power over mercy. Marco Caruso. He hadn't thought the name in years. He had trained himself not to. Names belonged to people, and people belonged to memories, and memories were dangerous things in a life built on forgetting. But now the name sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and unmovable, matched perfectly to the face across the table. "You've gone somewhere else," Mia observed, her voice gentler now, some of her earlier playfulness fading into concern. "Is it me? Did I say something wrong? I have a bad habit of talking too much when I'm nervous." "No," Alessandro said, forcing his voice into something steady, though it cost him everything to keep it there. "You haven't done anything wrong." "You sure? Because you're looking at me like I just told you I killed a man." She laughed lightly at her own joke, completely unaware of how close the words had landed to something unbearable. Alessandro's jaw tightened. He picked up his water glass, if only to give his hands something to do, though his fingers trembled slightly as he brought it to his lips. "Tell me about your father," he said, before he could stop himself. The question landed heavily between them. Mia's easy smile faltered, replaced by something more careful, more guarded, the look of a woman who had learned to protect a wound that never fully healed. "That's a strange thing to ask on a first meeting," she said slowly. "I know," Alessandro admitted. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I asked." Mia studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. That same perceptive intuition that had comforted him through countless late-night calls, now turning toward him like a blade. "You already know something about him," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Alessandro's silence answered for him. "On the phone," Mia continued, piecing it together slowly, her voice growing quieter with each word. "I told you he died 15 years ago. I told you nobody ever explained what happened. You never asked more than that. You never pushed." "I didn't want to hurt you," Alessandro said, and it was the truest thing he had said all night. "But you know something?" Mia pressed, leaning forward slightly, her earlier warmth replaced by a sharper, more focused intensity. "Don't you?" Alessandro felt the walls of his careful control crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. He had spent 15 years perfecting the art of silence, of burying truths so deep they couldn't claw their way back to the surface. But sitting across from her now, watching her face, the same face from that folded photograph, he felt something inside him break open completely. "My father was killed by men connected to organized crime," Mia said slowly, watching his face for any reaction. "That's what the police told my mother, before they closed the case without ever finding who actually pulled the trigger. I've spent 15 years trying to find someone who could tell me the truth. I've spent every spare dollar I've earned chasing leads that go nowhere." Alessandro closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted in his expression, something Mia had never seen on him before, not even in his darkest moments on the phone. It looked like grief. It looked like guilt, so deep it had no bottom. "Alessandro," Mia said carefully, her voice dropping into something quieter, more urgent. "What aren't you telling me?" He should have lied. Every instinct trained into him over decades screamed at him to lie, to redirect, to protect the empire he had built with silence and violence. He had lied to far more dangerous people than her, without a flicker of hesitation. But he couldn't make the words come. He couldn't force his mouth to form the comfortable deceptions that had kept him safe his entire adult life. "I think," he said slowly, each word costing him something vital, "that I should go." Mia blinked, caught entirely off guard by the sudden shift. "What? We just got here. You haven't even touched your drink." "This was a mistake," Alessandro said, rising from his chair too quickly, the movement sharp and unsteady, in a way that startled them both. "Alessandro, what's happening right now?" Mia asked, alarm creeping into her voice as she watched him retreat behind a wall she had never seen him build before, not even during his worst nights on the phone. "Talk to me. Whatever this is, we can talk about it." "I can't," he said, his voice breaking slightly on the second word. "I can't do this." "Do what?" Mia stood as well, reaching out instinctively, her hand brushing his forearm. The touch sent something electric and unbearable through him, and he flinched away from it like it had burned him. Hurt flashed across her face, quick and unguarded. "Okay," she said quietly, pulling her hand back. "Mia, I clearly said something wrong. Just tell me what it was so I can stop making it worse." "You didn't say anything wrong," Alessandro said, his voice rough with something dangerously close to tears, though his eyes remained dry, decades of discipline refusing to let that final crack show. "You didn't do anything. This is me. This has always been me." "That doesn't make any sense," Mia said, frustration and confusion mixing together in her voice now. 3 weeks, Alessandro. 3 weeks of phone calls, of you telling me things you said you'd never told anyone. And now you're standing here looking at me like I'm something you need to escape from." "Maybe you are," Alessandro said quietly, and the words landed like a slap. Mia recoiled slightly, hurt flickering across her features before hardening into something more guarded. "Wow," she said softly. "Okay, that's clear enough, I guess." "Mia, no, it's fine," she said, though her voice wavered slightly, betraying the effort it took to keep it steady. "I should have known better. Voices in the dark are easy to fall for. Real people are messier." Alessandro wanted to reach for her, wanted to explain everything, wanted to fall to his knees and beg for a forgiveness he knew he had no right to ask for. But every word he could offer led back to the same unbearable truth, and he wasn't ready, wasn't capable, of watching her face shatter with the reality of who he really was. "I'm sorry," he said instead, the words desperately inadequate against the weight of everything he was leaving unsaid. "For what, exactly?" Mia asked, her voice tight, her eyes bright with confusion and hurt. "For tonight, or for whatever you're clearly hiding?" "Both," Alessandro said. "Everything." And then, before she could respond, before he could lose his resolve entirely and tell her everything, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone beneath the amber lights of the rooftop, confusion and hurt written plainly across her face. Behind him, he heard her voice, quieter now, almost lost beneath the soft jazz still playing from hidden speakers. "Alessandro, wait." But he didn't stop. He couldn't. If he turned around now, if he looked at her face one more time, he wasn't sure he would ever be able to walk away again. And she deserved so much better than a man who had already taken everything from her once, without her ever knowing his name. The guilt didn't come in waves. It came in silence. Alessandro sat in his study, the rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city below a blur of neon and shadow. He hadn't slept in 6 days. He hadn't eaten in 3. The memory of Mia's face in the kitchen, the way her eyes had gone flat when she realized the truth, the way her breath had caught when he confessed, played on a loop in his mind. He had loved her. He had loved her before he knew who she was. He had loved her before he knew what he had done. And he had walked away. He had pushed her away because he knew she would never forgive him. He had pushed her away because he couldn't bear the weight of her hatred. But the silence in his penthouse had grown deafening. His phone buzzed on the desk. A text from an unknown number. "Hey, you can take your time." He stared at the screen. The voice on the other end, the voice that had become his lifeline, belonged to the man who had ordered her father's death. He shouldn't have replied. He should have deleted the number again. He should have walked away. Instead, his thumb moved. Mia. The name in his contacts had no last name, no face, just Mia. He typed, "I can't do this anymore." The message sent. He waited for the reply. He waited for the silence. But the phone didn't buzz. The next night, he found himself driving past her building. He told himself he was checking on her, making sure she was safe, making sure no one was following her. But the truth was simpler. He couldn't stay away. He parked 2 blocks away, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He watched her through the curtains of her second-story window. She was cooking. Pasta. The smell drifting through the open window. She was laughing at something on her phone. She looked tired, her hair falling across her shoulders, but she looked alive. And that was the problem. She was alive because of him. She was breathing because of the violence he had unleashed in the shadows. He had erased every threat that came near her. He had funded her investigation. He had cleaned up the mess he had made. But he had also erased her trust. He had erased her ability to know the man who loved her. And he had erased the only thing that had ever made him feel human. The rain began to fall harder. He didn't move. 3 weeks later, the calls stopped. Alessandro had changed his number. He had turned off his phone at night. He had deleted her contact. But he couldn't delete the memory of her voice. He couldn't delete the way she had laughed at his jokes. He couldn't delete the way she had listened to him when no one else would. He sat in his study, the whiskey untouched, the phone dead in his hand. And for the first time in years, he felt the walls of his empire cracking. He was going to have to face her again. Mia had always been good at following threads. She started with the police report from 15 years ago. The thin file, the missing evidence, the case closed before it ever really began. She'd spent years knocking on doors, asking questions at precincts that had long since been demolished, tracking down the names of the men who had been in that warehouse the night her father died. Most of them were dead. Some had vanished. A few had simply refused to answer. But the pattern was undeniable. The accidents that had taken out her father's rivals, the disappearances with no bodies, the way the city's underworld had suddenly grown quiet around her family's name after the funeral. She had a stack of notes on her kitchen table now, organized by date, by name, by connection. And in the center of it all was a single, impossible thread, a phone number that appeared in the records of 3 separate cleanup operations over the last year. A number she had saved in her phone under a name she never used. Quiet Guy. She frowned at the screen, setting the phone down and picking up a fresh notebook. Her fingers moved automatically, the pen scratching across the paper as she connected the dots. The Russo name was everywhere. Not in official records. Those were carefully erased, buried under layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. But in the whispers, in the way certain businesses vanished overnight, in the way certain people disappeared after crossing the wrong path. And every time she looked at the phone number, the name attached to it in her contacts, something in her chest twisted. Because she knew that voice. She knew the rhythm of it. She knew the way it sounded when it was tired, when it was quiet, when it was laughing at her bad jokes at 3 in the morning. She knew it better than she knew her own heartbeat. Mia stood up from the kitchen table, the notebook clutched in her hand, and walked to the window. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the streets slick and reflective, the city lights smeared like watercolors across the pavement. She couldn't see the Russo penthouse from here, but she knew it was there. She knew it had to be. Quiet Guy. She had called that number 3 weeks ago, the night Alessandro had shown up at the rooftop bar and then walked away from her without a word. She had called it again the next night and the night after that. Each time, the phone had gone to voicemail. Each time, she had left a message. Please just talk to me. She hadn't expected an answer. She had been ready for silence. But the number kept appearing in the records, and every time she saw it, she felt the same pull, toward the man on the other end, toward the voice that had become her anchor, toward the person who had been protecting her without her knowing who he was. She picked up the phone again, her thumb hovering over the dial. Don't, a voice in her head whispered, the same one she had heard in her dreams for weeks. He'll hurt you. But she had been hurting for 15 years. She had been hunting for the truth for 10, and she wasn't about to stop now, just because a voice in the dark had become the only thing that made her feel alive. Hey, she said into the phone, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her fingers. It's me. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. Mia. The name was low, rough, familiar. Her breath caught. Alessandro, she said, not letting the surprise show in her tone. I need to ask you something. There was a pause on the line. She could hear his breathing, shallow and controlled. What do you need? She stood by the window, the rain pattering against the glass. The city spread out before her like a map of secrets. "I've been digging," she said slowly, "into my father's death, into the Russo family, and I'm starting to see a pattern. A name keeps coming up, a number, and I need to know if you're connected to it." Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. "You're asking the wrong questions," Alessandro said finally, his voice tight. "I ask the questions I need to," she replied, her voice hard now. "I've been protecting myself for years. I'm not going to stop because you're suddenly in the picture." Another pause, then a long, slow exhale. "Mia, you don't understand." "I understand enough," she cut him off, her tone sharpening, the dry sarcasm returning with a vengeance. "You've been protecting me, from the mob, from the police, from the truth. But you're not the one who killed my father. You're just the one who's been cleaning up after it." The line went dead quiet. Mia waited, her heart hammering against her ribs, her eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets below. "Who told you that?" Alessandro asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your men," she said. "The ones you sent to my apartment. The ones who took my laptop. The ones who left the note. You're safe." Another long silence. "Alessandro," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Tell me the truth. Who are you?" The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, a breath, a rustle of fabric. "I'm a man who made mistakes," he said finally. "Mistakes that cost a man his life. Mistakes that cost his daughter her father." "Then why are you still here?" she asked. "Why you're protecting me? Why you're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm not alone?" The line crackled. She heard him shift, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor. "Because I love you," he said. "Because I've loved you for 3 weeks. Because I can't stop watching you, can't stop protecting you, even when I know I shouldn't." Mia's breath caught. The words landed like a physical blow, raw and devastating. She had known, deep down, that this was what it was. But hearing him say it, hearing the admission in his voice, the vulnerability underneath the control, changed everything. "Alessandro," she whispered, "you're the man who killed my father. I know. And you're the one who's been funding my search. I know. And you're the one who's been erasing everyone who gets too close. I know. So why should I believe you love me? Because I'm not lying about that." Mia stood there, the rain still falling outside her window, the city humming beneath her. She had always believed that the truth would set her free, but the truth was the one thing that might destroy her. She picked up her notebook, her pen hovering over the page. "Quiet guy." She wrote it down, the name she had given him in her contacts, the name that had become the only thing she knew for certain. And she realized, with a jolt of horror and fascination, that she wasn't sure she wanted the truth anymore. She just wanted him. The gunfire had stopped before she even hit the pavement. Mia scrambled back against the dumpster, her lungs burning, her vision swimming with spots. The rain was cold against her face, washing the blood from her hands, the terror from her chest. She didn't know how long she stood there. Minutes, hours. The alley was silent now, the only sound the distant wail of a siren fading into the night. And then, a voice. "Mia?" The voice was calm, steady, the voice she had come to know. The voice that had become her anchor. She closed her eyes, the rain hitting her face, the blood rushing in her ears. "Hey, you can take your time." She didn't answer. She didn't know if she could, but she knew one thing for certain. The truth was out, and the danger had just begun. Alessandro stood in the center of his study, the rain lashing against the windows, the city below a blur of light and shadow. His hand trembled as he lowered the gun. The man in the hallway, the hitman, lay dead at his feet, a single bullet through his chest. The only sound was the rain and his own ragged breathing. He had killed to protect her. He had killed to keep her safe. He had killed because he couldn't let anyone else take her from him. But the guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on him until he couldn't breathe. "Mia," The name echoed in his mind. The woman who had loved him in the dark. The woman who had stood in his kitchen and stared at the truth. The woman who had run into the alley when the shots rang out. He had to find her. He had to make sure she was alive. He had to tell her everything. Mia's phone buzzed in her pocket. The screen lit up with a name she didn't recognize. Alessandro. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The words were too heavy. The truth was too big. The love was too dangerous. But the phone kept vibrating, the name repeating over and over. Alessandro. Mia, please. She lifted the phone to her ear, her hand shaking. Alessandro, she whispered, you're the one who killed my father. The line went silent for a long moment. Then his voice, low and raw, came through. I know. And you're the one who's been protecting me. I know. And you're the one who's been erasing everyone who gets too close. I know. So why should I believe you love me? Because I'm not lying about that. Mia's breath caught. The words landed like a physical blow, raw and devastating. She had known, deep down, that this was what it was. But hearing him say it, hearing the admission in his voice, the vulnerability underneath the control, changed everything. Alessandro, she whispered, I don't know if I can do this. I know, he said, and I don't blame you. She stood there, the rain still falling, the city humming beneath her. She had always believed that the truth would set her free, but the truth was the one thing that might destroy her. She picked up her notebook, her pen hovering over the page. Quiet guy. She wrote it down, the name she had given him in her contacts, the name that had become the only thing she knew for certain. And she realized, with a jolt of horror and fascination, that she wasn't sure she wanted the truth anymore. She just wanted him. Mia didn't move. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood in the alley, the rain soaking her heart pounding, her mind racing. Alessandro, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You're the man who killed my father. I know. And you're the one who's been funding my search. I know. And you're the one who's been erasing everyone who gets too close. I know. So why should I believe you love me? Because I'm not lying about that. The silence stretched between them. The rain fell harder, washing the streets clean. Then a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a man in a dark coat, his hand on a gun. He looked at Alessandro, then at Mia. Mr. Russo, the man said. The girl knows too much. Alessandro's body went rigid. His hand moved to his own side, his fingers brushing the concealed weapon at his waist. Get out, Alessandro said, his voice low and dangerous. Now. The man laughed, a short, dry sound. You think I'm here for you? You think this is about you? He raised his weapon. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Mia, run, Alessandro said, his voice urgent now. Get out the back now. She didn't need to be told twice. She spun around, her legs carrying her toward the back door before she could think. Her hands fumbled with the lock, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound of gunfire erupted behind her. She burst out into the alley behind her apartment, the rain soaking her clothes, the city lights blurring around her. She could hear shouting, the sound of footsteps pounding behind her, the heavy thud of boots on concrete. She ran. She didn't stop. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs gave out, until she collapsed against a dumpster, gasping for air, her hands trembling against the cold metal. And then she heard the voice on the other end of the line. Mia? The voice was calm, steady, the voice she had come to know. She closed her eyes, the rain hitting her face, the blood rushing in her ears. Hey, you can take your time. She didn't answer. She didn't know if she could, but she knew one thing for certain. The truth was out. And the danger had just begun. The rain stopped. The city lights shone bright above them, the streets quiet now, the danger gone. Mia sat beside Alessandro in his car, the engine humming softly. She held the notebook in her lap, the truth laid out before her. She had spent 15 years chasing a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. She had built walls, pushed people away, convinced that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. And then she had met a man in the dark, a voice that had become her lifeline, a man who had loved her before he knew who she was, before he knew what he had done. But now, the truth was out. The danger was real, but the love was stronger. She looked at Alessandro, his face illuminated by the streetlights, his eyes soft, his hands steady on the wheel. He had chosen her. He had chosen her over his empire. He had chosen her over his secrets. He had chosen her over his past. And she had chosen him. "I'm not going to stop investigating," she said, her voice firm, "but I'm not going to do it alone." Alessandro smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Then I'll help you. I'll help you find the truth. I'll help you find the people who did this. And then we'll figure out the rest." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the rain finally stopping, the night settling into a quiet, fragile peace. "Book 2?" she asked, a hint of a smile on her lips. Alessandro glanced at her, his eyes warm. "If you want." She laughed, a low, bright sound. "I'll hold you to that." The city was quiet now. The rain had washed away the blood. The danger was gone, but the truth remained. Mia sat in Alessandro's penthouse, the notebook open on the table, the truth laid out before her. She had found the answers she had been searching for. She had found the man who had loved her in the dark. She had found a new beginning. But as she looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw something else. A shadow moving in the distance. A figure watching from the rooftop. And she knew, with a chill that had nothing to do with the rain, that the truth was only the beginning.